Welcome to this employer compliance webinar on managing an abandonment process by Employer Pro, empowering employers through effective people solutions. My name's Ken Duffy, employment law specialist and director here at Employer Pro. Employer Pro at a glance. Employer Pro protects employers via effective people solutions. We offer a cost-effective membership model with optional benefits. We have a suite of legally compliant employment documentation, including guidelines, webinars, walkthroughs, and templates for managing key employment processes. We offer employer support, assistance, and representation. We assist employers to navigate workplace compliance and employment laws. Overview. In terms of this webinar about managing an abandonment process, we will be looking at when an employer should be using an abandonment process, what are the key requirements and considerations in terms of this particular employment process, the importance of contact attempts and the length of unexplained absence by an employee, what the formal consultation process looks like, including the key steps and requirements for employers when embarking or implementing on an abandonment process in order to ensure that that process will withstand subsequent legal scrutiny in the event that it's challenged. Key legal considerations and risks. Employer Pro's resources for managing an abandonment process that are available for our members to use, and practical hints and tips to employers who are tackling the various issues that can arise in terms of an abandonment procedure. When to use an abandonment process. This particular type of employment process is used where an employee fails to show up to work and is absent without explanation, authorization, or communication. It requires a continuous period of unexplained absence and a lack of intention by the employee to return to work. So typically, abandonment clauses in employment agreements will reference 3 or 5 consecutive calendar days of unexplained absence, and that being the trigger point to an employer considering then going on to implement an abandonment procedure or process to end employment in the event an employee fails to return or continues not to communicate. So absence in this context is without authorization, notification, and communication. Those are the key things to keep front of mind if you're an employer who's considering an abandonment process or procedure. So typically it's used, like I said earlier, where an employee's absence without communication, notification, authorization for anywhere between 3 or 5 consecutive working days, and the employment agreement will always be relevant to assessing that question. Read or check out Employer Pro's comprehensive ebook on managing an abandonment process for more information, including commentary, step-by-step guidelines, practical hints and tips, template letters, and procedures for implementing a thorough abandonment procedure in line with employment law. The importance of contact attempts by the employer and the length of unexplained absence. Crucial considerations to any employer who is looking to end employment on the basis of abandonment. So an employer must be able to demonstrate that it has made all reasonable contact attempts, and that's the starting point. So it's incumbent on the employer, just like any other employment process, to be able to justify dismissal. And so in the context of an abandonment process or procedure, the employer must be able to demonstrate that it has tried to initiate contact attempts to clarify the employee's whereabouts, including whether they're coming back to work before terminating their employment. So employers should always have at least several contact attempts and record those, including phone, text message, email, next of kin, letters, these sorts of things, follow-ups to try and initiate or facilitate communication and the employee's return to work. If the employee is away for 3 or more consecutive working days, and again the employment agreement or policies will be relevant to informing that question, then the employer can look at starting the consultation process. So check the obligations under the employment agreement and policies regarding abandonment, like I said, and it is not an appropriate process to use where there's been a disagreement between the employer and the employee, and the employer is well aware why the employee is away from work, or these sort of heat of the moment circumstances. Good judgment always applies. So, where there's communication from the employee, or where the employer knows that the employee is likely to return to work in the foreseeable future, then an abandonment procedure is likely not going to be the right or correct employment process to deal with whatever the issues are there. Again, check out the ebook. There's a lot of practical information and good information in that ebook to inform these sorts of questions, or for further guidance if you need it as an employer. In terms of a general roadmap for informing what a formal consultation process and the key steps look like, or that are legally required by an employer before terminating employment on grounds of abandonment, an abandonment process generally needs to at least involve the following steps. So step one, check the employment documentation. What does the employment agreement or policy say, like I've mentioned? Two, make several attempts to contact the employee and continue to do that. Record those steps to contact them, whether it's phone calls, voice messages, emails, letters, these sorts of things. Record the various attempts to make contact, as well as text messages trying to clarify the employee's whereabouts and when they're coming back to work. Step three, and this is a crucial one, after the employee's been away for whatever the time frame is, as prescribed under the employment agreement or policy, which is generally 3 working days consecutively, no contact, unauthorized, no communication, well then it's incumbent on the employer to notify or bring the employee's attention to the risk of abandonment and the requirement for them to return back to work, and giving them a time frame to do that before finally, which is step 4, notifying the employee of termination on grounds of abandonment. So in summary, the above steps would be completed over at least a week, including setting a deadline for the employee to return to work before confirming termination of employment. Again, use Employer Pro step-by-step guidelines and template letters, including the relevant documents to facilitate a process if you're needing support with managing or facilitating an abandonment procedure. Key legal considerations: just like any termination process, an employee who is terminated on grounds of abandonment can challenge their dismissal, and the relevant sections of the Employment Relations Act 2000 are notably Section 4, which deals with good faith, and Section 103A, the test of justification. And again, as always, fair process is paramount. Refer to our ebook on managing an abandonment process, the step-by-step guidelines, template letters and documents for further support or assistance with managing this process. However, in summary, the main considerations and some of the legal considerations in this context is that the employer must have a length of unexplained absence and a clear lack of communication by the employee. There has to be a period, like I mentioned before, of at least 3 working days, potentially longer, of unexplained, unauthorized absence. The employer must make at least several attempts to contact the employee, and those should be recorded so there is a record or there's evidence of the attempts that the employer has made to contact the employee and clarify their whereabouts and whether they're coming back to work. There should or must be a clear lack of intention demonstrated by the employee to return to work. So that's something to keep front of mind when implementing an abandonment process. Notifying the employee of any potential abandonment risk and the deadline for them to return to work. So generally you'd be sending out a formal letter to their last known residential address or place of residence, email, etc., spelling everything out. Like I said before, the ebook on abandonment has the template letters with the default procedural fairness considerations and these sorts of legal considerations embedded into it. So you just need to populate it with the relevant facts and check it before sending it out. But that is there and is a very useful tool for employers to follow the step-by-step procedure and use those templates. Termination of abandonment or termination for employment on grounds of abandonment would occur if the employee fails to return to work before whatever the set deadline is. So the employer would draw the employee's attention to that and give them the opportunity to return to work and clarify why they've been away, these sorts of things before terminating their employment. If they remain absent from work and there's a clear lack of communication and intention to return and the employer has completed the various steps that are required, then it would be in a position to potentially end employment on grounds of abandonment. So key legal risks at a very high level, just like any scenario where an employee's employment is terminated, that does potentially risk exposure to personal grievance claims and other legal claims and remedies relating to things like injury to feelings compensation or so-called hurt and humiliation, lost wages, legal costs, potentially reinstatement arguments, penalties for breaches of good faith, etc. So things to keep an eye on and be mindful or wary of as an employer when looking to terminate an employee's employment, including on grounds of abandonment. Then there are reputational consequences, as often cases are a matter of public record and they do get reported on from time to time. And along with that, or in addition to that, you have the management time and the stress of dealing with employment litigation associated with a protracted or contentious employment dispute. Your pros resources. So Employer Pro has a range of resources and tools available to help employers. Comprehensive ebooks, including step-by-step guidelines and commentary, concise practical employer toolkits for managing key employment processes, including for abandonment. Template letters and documents, webinars and training videos like the webinar you're listening to now, employment documentation, pro-employer employment agreements and workplace policies that have been drafted to the interest or to protect the interests of the employer and that are compliant, access to further advice through advisory consultations or hands-on support through consultancy arrangements or formal terms of engagement if required. In terms of practical hints and tips for employers to be aware of or take into account when navigating this particular area or process in terms of employment law, ensure all reasonable contact attempts are exhausted and go above and beyond there. So in the suite of documents associated with the employer toolkit or resource pack on this subject, you can use the document marked record of contact inquiries by the employer to batch and categorize. Keep a record of all the various contact attempts that you've made. Ensure all staff or employee contact details, being phone numbers, email, emergency contact, next of kin addresses, are up to date. These sorts of basic things. Check any contractual or policy requirements or obligations concerning or relating to abandonment carefully before doing anything, and ensure that if anything specific or relevant to those is stated, then the process or how the process is run is informed by those requirements. Ensure any formal letter issued addressing important matters, or ensure a formal letter is issued addressing important matters, including the deadline for the employee to return to work, using the template letter marked notice of abandonment risk, and the requirement to return to work as an option, which is associated with the employer toolkit that I mentioned before. It simply needs to be populated or fill in the blanks to for using or meeting that particular requirement. Ensure the situation involves a clear intention that the employee does not intend to return to work, and that's usually self-explanatory and evidenced by the employee failing to communicate and not engaging with the employer. Read Employer Pro's ebook on managing an abandonment process and use those templates, documents and resources. They're very helpful, like I mentioned before. In terms of general disclaimers, this webinar is for guidance and information purposes only. It does not constitute formal legal advice. Employer Pro Limited is not responsible for any liability or otherwise arising out of the use of this webinar. Seek professional advice from Employer Pro by becoming a member today if further assistance or support is required. Employer Pro, supporting employers. Visit www.employerpro.co.nz or email info@employerpro.co.nz for further information or assistance.